Welcome to Kojo Fosu Inspires YouTube channel. Please try and then subscribe to our YouTube channel as you watch our videos, and also like so we'll be able to do more videos to help out. On this part B, we'll be looking at balance of power, coercive security, alliance, polarity, and then also we'll be touching on diplomacy and power diplomacy. In the subsequent video, which is the part B, we'll also look at that of war, peace, foreign policy, international law, ontology, methodology, and then epistemology. So stay tuned and stay glued so that turn on your subscription so that you definitely receive all this notification. The balance of power is a system where power is distributed so no single state dominates. So over here is when you find other states trying to come together to make sure that within the global system, you don't have one state having to have it all or control everything. More like preventing an hegemony to maintain the status quo, as in having that of different powers instead of having one person or one country being that powerful. So over here is about preventing hegemony and then preserving the status quo. So not about harmony. That is where I sure. So usually we see that the balance exists in crisis and war, not in quiet times. Yeah, we don't know in quiet time. And then the balance of power is mainly a great power game. When we say it's mainly a great power game, it exists between these great powers, where you're looking at the likes of United Kingdom, the likes of Russia, the likes of China, the likes of US, the likes of Germany. These great powers are where we actually talk about when we are referring to the great power what game. Smaller states, which are the likes of Ghana, Togo, the likes of um, Chile, the likes of Honduras. These are smaller states. They usually align with what coalition that are shaped by these big players. So giving you this example, when we talk about mechanism, then I think the examples will come. Then you understand where we're coming from with that. So when we talk about the mechanism, we're looking at most of the mechanism that aligns with balance of power has to do with what alliance. When people come together as block to as in raise the power, arm building or arm control, diplomacy, and then other classic tools that also exist to deal with, as in divide and rule and the buffer state position between rivals. These ones also are part of it. So within the Cold War, which is the U.S. and then Soviet war rivalry, from the late 1990s to the early 1990s, realized that the United States and the Soviet Union were superpowers when they were caught in more like a tense global standoff, where each of these countries were building a massive military and nuclear arsenal, and then created like opposite alliance. So you had NATO and you had the Warsaw Pact. The NATO was some alliance of Europeans, and then Warsaw Pact was also that of the Soviet Union, then Poland, and certain other countries that were part of this alliance, which was meant to counter the emergence of NATO. In the subsequent ones, I'll explain it far better and explain it. So this rivalry kept either side becoming all powerful, and then what that was a classical case of what balance of power in action. So you realize that within the global system, within this era of the 1940s, the 1940s, 1990s, people mostly third world countries just had to either align with the US or had to align with the Soviet Union. Are you getting me? So that is how we talk about a balance of power, where you had the two existence of these countries, where trying to make sure that one does not have everything and is not all that power and mighty. So that is that forward the balance of power. Then collective security. Collective security. So when you say collective security, it is the idea that aggression against one is aggression against all. So a system where power is distributed, collective security is a concept aiming to prevent war by creating a system where aggression against one, as I said, is considered aggression against all states. And I'm sure you've actually heard this particular term, which has to do with NATO Article 5, in following the Russian-Ukraine war, where some members are saying if Ukraine is being drawn into NATO, it means that is an automatic member, and then their war, they may inherit the war from Russia. Okay, so you have some people, some leaders making some of this assertion because of what the collective what security alliance between NATO what members. That's what we are referring to, the collective security alliance between what NATO members, just like all for one, all for all. So it is to prevent war by what deterring the first act of what aggression. So this is means that should in case a member state, for example, Germany is being attacked, that means all NATO members would then have to come to the defense of Germany. That is what we mean by what collective security, all for one, all for all, and then what we also imply by saying that an aggression against one state is an aggression against all states. So unlike the balance of power, which manage rivalry by weighing blocks, collective security ties to or tries to what manage the community as a whole. So they can deal with or punish what aggressors, whoever does it or whoever comes against that. So not just an opposing block. I hope you're getting me. And then looking at some example indices, is it learning from the field of the League of Nations, which was meant to establish after the First World War, which is the 1990. The League of Nations actually failed. That was in 1939. So the United Nations, what you realize that the United Nations learns from some of these mistakes of the League of Nations. So they actually put in what a Security Council that can authorize sanctions and force on what on behalf of what international community, which may be they has a fewer members binding decision, a background in and how the UN peacekeeping and all those things are engaged. So what you realize is that the Gulf War in 1991, which is when I'm referring to the first Bush 1991, we realize that there was a collective what enforcement under the UN, where I'm referring to the incident where Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, where the United Nations Security Council authorized what a multinational coalition to use all necessary means to expel Iraq's forces. So this is what also an example of what out of what a collective what security. And also we're moving to another important and also another one you have to pay attention to, which is what anarchy. Anarchy. So anarchy refers to the absence of a higher or superintendent authority in the international system that can set rules for what state behavior and enforce compliance. So when it comes to anarchy in international relations, there is no higher or a higher authority. There is no one single government that can set rules and enforce them the way it is done in the domestic setting or in the domestic governance system. No. So that is why international politics have a self-help environment. So states must provide for their own what security and survival, because there isn't that of that international police that has to do with how to do with the international system, how to put in order. But I want us to look at this. Put this in mind. Anarchy is not disorder. Anarchy does not mean the international system is so chaotic that everybody's just fighting themselves and missiles flying from one country. No, anarchy is not disorder. It is an organized chaos. So it's a complex situation or process that what applies chaos whilst having what enough order to achieve progress or goals, or enough order is which is equal to international law. So when you realize this, even though Russia has invaded what Ukraine, you realize that there is still a portion of what engagement where European leaders, the United States, and other parties that are aligned to Ukraine, trying to find what an amicable what solution for this particular war to be dealt with. So you realize that even though there's that chaos, there's a sitting around the table to deal with that. So it's more like an organized what chaos. That's what we mean by an organized what chaos. I hope you're getting my perspective on that. As in that's what we mean by an organized what chaos. So looking at with our earlier slides on anarchy, we realize that we had one quote from Twistedale who says that the strong act as they want, the weak act, the weak suffer as they should. The strong act as they want, and the weak suffers as they should. So, in a nutshell of that, what Twistedale is trying to say is that the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. So that seeks to give us that vibe of the fact that there isn't that of that global police to ensure that. So more like the strong may have it way, the weak will just have to be subdued. So explaining this particular security dilemma that does not exist in the international system, which comes under anarchy. So we say that in anarchy, one state what defense steps or can also what, look at what offensive to what or offensive to others. So one nation's defensive steps can be offensive to others. So, for example, state A buys air defenses or uphold an exercise. You then realize that state B feels less safe and build up too. So when you realize when North Korea's president Kim Jong Un does missile tests in North Korea, you realize that South Korea is worried, Japan is worried, and then sometimes you find the US and then Japan and South Korea having to do what military drills. Then North Korea will also have to do this. They also see it as a threat. So that is what we are talking about over here. That's what we are talking about. So uh, the from A and B, as we are putting here, let's say the A representing North Korea, who is just doing that, firing up missiles and all those things. The B, which is South Korea and then Japan, will see that as a threat, also engage in military drills and all those things, and it raises tensions and all these things. That's why we talk about the fact of what it being anarchos in terms of the global what system. So having to move to come to our current slides where we currently are talking about, which has to do with diplomacy. Diplomacy, the first one we're going to touch on now. So diplomacy, the as what when professionals or activities or skills of managing international relation, typically by a country represents abroad, and then or the act of what obtaining agreement between countries who need to what cooperate to produce resource in which each has what an interest. So with this definition, in practice, it means that when it comes to diplomacy, we're talking about persuasion, negotiation, compromise, and what representation, preferably from both places. Yeah. So that's what we are looking at. So we're looking at persuasion, negotiation, compromise, and representation when it comes to what diplomacy. And the representation has to do with, or is it speaks about. So it speaks and acts for the state. That's the representation. They speak, or the representatives, they speak and act on behalf of the state. So you realize that, for example, Ghana's foreign minister, Honorable Okucheto Ablaka, will be sent on behalf of the country to go and represent us on with meetings and also speak on behalf of the state. The same way you may find U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio being sent out to also speak and act on behalf of what of the United States. So they speak and act on for what for the state. Hope you're getting me. These are all diplomats, and then what protect what the nation what abroad. So secondly, negotiation. They reach agreements, which is treaties or MOU or ceasefires or what or trade deals. That's what also happens. So you realize that when the first ceasefire deal that was between Israel and then Hamas, there was a meeting where some US diplomats were there, speak, and then had to put the war on hold before the war also resumed again. So this is what also about negotiation. So another one has to do with information and reporting. So they read the environment, advise home government. So definitely having to see the CIA director, having to see the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, having to go with President Donald Trump for the meeting at Alaska. The same way Sergei Lavrov of Russia having to go with President Vladimir Putin, all these diplomats would definitely advise their presidents and then read the room and also give what their insight to their president in terms of what decision making. So they also keep what channels open in what in crisis and clarify what intention. So what you realize is that most of the times, even in the midst of war, there is a channel that's open in terms of diplomacy where countries can still reach each other, even in terms of war, and then still what communicate and having to come up with what solutions. Diplomacy is also about what promotion, where there's advanced economy, culture, security objective, like the export, investment, image, alliance, and all those. So these are all part of diplomacy in terms of its core what functions. So one thing I want us to put in mind that diplomacy, what diplomacy is not. Diplomacy is not threat dressed up as dialogue and not propaganda alone. It is what or it can sit along pressure, sanctions, or force. But diplomacy on its own is what as a tool, which is persuasion, finding a mutual what acceptance, acceptable what outcome. That's what diplomacy is. That's what diplomacy is. So we move to this. I also find that diplomacy is what you see that of what President Donald Trump in his first term when he came to office. You see President Donald Trump, and you see his Secretary of State. You see that of former Japanese President. Also there, you see Angela Merkel and other dignitaries. The French President, also Emmanuel Macron, also over there. And this picture tells us a lot. And then the picture beneath over there also sees a delegation. This is between the US and then Russia, Iran, UK on the Iran nuclear deal when they had to meet for what a roundtable discussion. So we could look at the types of diplomacy. The types of diplomacy. The first type we want to look at is the soft power diplomacy. So soft power is the act of winning hearts and minds, getting what you want through attraction rather than coercion. It works when other societies admires your what your culture, political values, and what policies. So they choose to what align with you. So the core tool that aligns with that of what of soft, it has to do with what can be scholarship, exchange programs, international broadcasting, culture programs, and public messaging. That is how it is. So you realize that yeah, China is having a lot of culture programs around in African countries, most African countries, universities, and all those things. That is part of what soft what power diplomacy. So within the Cold War era, you realize that the U.S. funded the Voice of America, which is the VOA. That was in 1941. And then Radio Free Europe. That was in 1949, right? And then the U.S. Information Agency. All these were to help what also with that of the U.S. culture, propagated the U.S. agenda and all those kind of stuff, and sell the U.S. culture. The same way the post Cold War was selling leadership after the 1999 was Washington still used public diplomacy to justify its leadership in in a unipolarity system. So that is how some of these things also go. And you also realize that um, the issues of media and culture was used when the US had to uh, have to go into into Iraq in 1990, and also had to respond when it came to 9/11. So the next type is going to do cultural diplomacy. Cultural diplomacy. So a long-standing strand of public or soft diplomacy, where states use culture and people-to-people ties to influence opinions abroad, right? So that has to do with culture diplomacy, and then some of the tools that also has to do with exhibition, films, music, sports diplomacy, language core. So all you realize is that academic exchange. You realize that, for example, South Korea using K-pop song, using that of the Korean drama series that is permeating certain places. That's cultural diplomacy. Another example also comes in that's the 1930s to 1970s, where the U.S. and the Soviet cultural track, where you have the Roosevelt State Department, which was 1936, used ACT and then student exchange to showcase national culture and then reduce stereotypes. So the next one has to do with what? Military or defense diplomacy. So defense diplomacy is the what? The peacetime use of what? Military channels, attached or joint exercise, training, port vessels, peacekeeping, and security what assistance to build trust, shape what perception, and what advance foreign policy without what fighting. So these activities carried by what representative of defense department aim at what pursuing the foreign policy interest of a state in security and what and defense. So as I said, the peacetime use of what military channel defense, joint military exercise, and all those. So, for example, you mostly find the picture you see on your right side, where you see military drills between that of United States and then South Korea, is one of what military diplomacy. You see that of what you see between Russia, China, and then Belarus is also engaged in military drills. Russia, China, and then Belarus has also engaged in military drills. So all these are part of this. The US has also engaged in some European countries in military drills, also what as part of NATO's what preparedness of its forces. So all these are part of what military what diplomacy. And then moving to that of what smart power diplomacy, the intentional blend of what hard power, which is the coercion, military and economic war tool, and then soft power, which is attraction, legitimacy to what achieve what goal. So having to come to the smart power diplomacy. So having to come to the smart power diplomacy, you realize that if hard power is used well, it gives leverage, while the soft power gives what concerns and legitimacy altogether. So they produce this durable what outcome, or this great outcome, without having to engage in any force. And an example of this narration will be the Gulf War in 1991, where the US cultivated international support. So they used the public diplomacy, they worked with the UN workers, the soft power, whilst assembling a robust military coalition, which is the hard power, to expel Iraq from what? From Kuwait. Yeah. So that is an example also of what? Of smart power diplomacy. Going to power diplomacy. Power diplomacy refers to the engagement of sub-state entities like regions, cities, or province in international relations, often through direct contact with foreign government, organization, or non-state actors. And all these terms have already been explained, so you already have an understanding of non-state actors. And so, a city signing what a cooperation assignment agreement with what a foreign city, or what a province government establish trade ties with what a foreign region. That is that of it. So you see the flag of Catalan below over here, which uh, the Catalan, which finds itself in Spain, sometimes engage in negotiation with other state or intergovernmental organizations, which is called what parallel diplomacy, because these are not states themselves, but they are sub-state entities like regions and cities that find themselves in states. So recently, you find that most states are engaging in some of these things due to climate change and trying to find um, agreements with intergovernmental organizations, NGOs, and other states what to talk about. So, for example, you can have a lot of what Accra, Paris Embassy working out as Accra to Paris City Hall Corporation on climate or that. So that's an example of you can have of what something of power what diplomacy. So Quebec, which is what you see out there, which is also in Canada, you find also them also in some engage in what power what diplomacy, where they also engage other staff states to talk about certain things and then work them what out. So you ask me why do power diplomacy happen? I'll tell you it is globalization of local what problems. So at the local level, some may have issues of climate, migration, pandemic, supply chain, and they may want to help to deal with some of these level at the what local what level. So there's economic competition, which where you have sub-national or unite or also engage in what in tourism. So all these are part of what some reasons why power diplomacy what happens. So moving to the next one, which has to do with this particular statement, to explain, since we've come to the end of power diplomacy and diplomacy, we're ending with this statement from out of Hitler's quote when he says that when diplomacy ends, war begins. So in a nutshell, it just means that diplomacy is a part, a peaceful what management of a relation. So as I said earlier, we're dealing with persuasion, negotiation, compromise, communication to advance what interest and avert what crisis or chaos. So when those channels break down, or they are blocked, or it doesn't exist, so state operating under anarchy, you then come and see states who operate under what anarchy. So like because there is no world order or world governing body to enforce rules, they fall back towards self-help. And at that point, they often switch to what either bargaining or to what coercion or threat or sanction. And then if the bargaining, coercion, or threat sanction fails, then it results what in war. So having to deal with our next one has to do with alliance. So with an alliance is a formal what agreement, or I'll say promise, between two or more states to cooperate, usually in security matters, so that if one faces a threat, the other supports it. So alliances are part of statecraft, and then this state expects military and what diplomatic help from all partners when crisis what arises. So when you realize that when some countries want to form alliance or pact with some. So currently, fine, you realize that Russia and then North Korea signed an alliance of no limits relationship, so that when one will come to each country's aid or help if something is supposed to happen. Where you also find that China also signing an agreement or alliance with Russia as in low limit partnership. So these are some of what the alliance that also exists. So there are types of alliance. We have military alliance, which has to do with defense and security pact. So, for example, you have NATO, which is what that is an alliance, so collective defense. The Warsaw Pact was also what is also in response to what that of NATO. That was also what a military what alliance. There's also what political or ideological what alliance, where you find people coordinating in foreign policy position and then what and regime what support. So example point from the examples are from, so it's like states will offer perfect partnership with similar political outlook, which shapes alliance choice and what and then cohesion. And then economic alliance also, where there is trade ties, where currently you have the United Kingdom and then India having to sign a free trade pact among themselves and alliance. So all these are some of things where we refer to what alliance and the types of what of the types of alliance that exist. So most we'll come to a theory, the theories of international relations, which is realism and the rest. But realize that two hazard or problems when it comes to alliance has to do with abandonment versus what entrapment, which is more like a classical dilemma, where you countries may rely on others to come to their aid when something happens, and then they don't. The partnership breaks up or something happens. So these are some of the challenges that also comes with what alliance. And then I've mentioned the Warsaw Pact, I think twice or three. So I think I would have to mention it or explain it. So the Warsaw Pact, as I said earlier, was the Soviet Union military alliance formed in 1955, and then it was to counter what a NATO and lock the Eastern Bloc into what a unified what command. So it pledged mutual defense and to enable what the station of Soviet troops across Eastern European countries, and was used to what enforce Moscow's role in what in crisis like Hungary in 1956 and in Chechnya in 1968, as the communist regime fall in what in 1989 to 1990. The pact what unveiled and then formally what dissolved in 1991. So that is what is about the Warsaw Pact that you've heard me mention multiple times. So we go to polarity. Polarity. So polarity refers to the distribution of power capabilities among the major actors, which is a primary state in the international system. It describes the number of poles or dominant power centers. So I want to put this to make you understand this very well, that when it comes to polarity, unipolarity means that the system, there's only one dominant or major power. That's unipolarity. And then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the world has seen the existence of a unipolarity, which is the hegemony, which is the United States. Some scholars argue that currently in 2025 we live in the multipolarity, where we have the existence of China, Russia, and US. That's what some scholars argue on that. But what I can say is that as of now, there is still one existence of polarity, one country that holds that polarity or that hegemonic status, which is what the United States of America, where we say the age of what American hegemony. So I'll go with that, not the other scholars' assertion, but I'll go with this particular assertion until things change or different times bring different events. But until then, the US is still, in my view, is the age of what America is, the age of the world's hegemony. And also, going to bipolarity. Bipolarity existed before 1990, when the Cold War, the Soviet Union disintegrated. Before then, after the Second World War, the world was operating a bipolarity where we had the existence of two major powers, which was Russia, the Soviet Union then, and the United States of America. And then multipolarity is when you have the existence of several great powers in the world. Before World War One, the world had a multipolarity nature, or the world was multipolar, in the sense that we had the likes of Great Britain, the likes of France, the likes of other existence great powers that existed, Germany, that were all existed and were strong in that era. So we call that era what a multipolar era. So these are examples of also giving to support that and make you understand. In our next subsequent videos, you'll see the part 3 of what we have to talk about. Thank you very much for listening to us, and please do your best to subscribe, click on the subscribe button, and then also like our videos. Thank you very much.